Well, I recently managed to get a used copy here of Arkham Horror, and I figured I'd cover this because largely a few weeks ago my wife and I played about 3 games, but I can't guarantee we got the rules right completely. I can't guarantee I'm going to get them right completely here, but I hope to give you some idea of it and then jump into the play. I'm sure I'll screw some things up, no biggie there. But I do not want to face these rules again if I can help it. Now, I've got a pile of errata here, and I did not bother to read these. I'm not really interested in them. The game probably isn't going to change too significantly based on them. It may change balance-wise. It may change in terms of fixing the puzzles or whatever. I also have thrown in the Curse the Dark Pharaoh expansion. That came with my game. Everything was shuffled in together. I'm not sure. There's a way of finding the cards. They have a little symbol on them, but my eyes are not good enough to note that symbol. It's kind of like magic cards, you know, it's a little piece somewhere on them, I don't know. But it's mixed into all the different decks. There's a few ways you can play it. The way I'm playing it is called the it's the Permanent Exhibition. The Traveling Exhibition kind of focuses more on those cards. The Permanent Exhibition just throws them into the main deck. And since that's what I kind of have, that's where we are. Let's take a look at what some of the components are. And this is a game based on the Cthulhu mythos. It was actually originally put out by Chaosium, if I'm not mistaken, who are sort of the masters of, well, they wrote Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, and I don't know if they did any other things other than this. The original map for this, man, it looks so cool. It's like, I don't know, just sort of this, there's a carnival with a little Ferris wheel and stuff, and it's much, much lighter. I've seen other people have a map that's also lighter toned, but using this design. Now this is by Fantasy Flight. I don't know how much they changed the game. One way or another, I wouldn't be shocked if they made some significant modifications. They tend to take things I saw with Wire Knights. I don't know if I have anything else by them that was old, an older game that they updated. Well, certainly Twilight Imperium 3, but you know, that's a series they own, so whatever. Okay, so what do we have? Well, the board is divided into locations, some of which have little instructions on them. And there are things you can do there instead of having a normal encounter. Now, one thing to note about this game is a lot of it, in terms of that, kind of reminds me of Talisman, especially the city in Talisman, where there's all these different things to do, and it's really hard to keep track of all the different things there are. Certainly, if you play it enough, you're going to get kind of used to it. But for me, when I break out Talisman, I can't remember the city anymore. I can remember just about everything else. But the city has too many of these in it, and this is going to feel kind of the same way. You kind of have to read them, think about them, and make your plans. And, well, I'm not hooked on this game in quite the way that would cause me to do that. Although, when my wife and I played this, we played it 3 times in a row, basically. She really, really loves it. And, well, if I didn't have many games, I would probably put the time in to see all these, just because it is a good game of that nature. Otherwise, what do we have? Well, we got little figures for all the characters, and I've set up a 4-player game, and I'm going to be playing it, obviously, playing through with you guys, those of you with the stamina or fortitude to deal with my blathering. We have a set here of 9 different decks. These match the colors of the different neighborhoods, and if I was really clever, I would arrange them in order by the neighborhoods. So like white is downtown over here, etc. The kind of grayish black is the East Town area. Those are encounters that you draw if you're in a location in that area and you get to have an encounter. Now remember, you don't get to have an encounter if you choose to take the special encounter, like in the police station if you get deputized. You don't get to have your encounter draw a card. It's kind of your choice which one to do, but you have control over things that are listed here, so often you'll be probably doing the thing of the location rather than drawing a card, but some locations don't have any special ability, and you may want to go there anyway, and you get to draw a card. we also have the characters. And characters, I haven't fully set them up. Characters come with a number of things on them. Let's pull some of this information off. And you'll see I've kind of stored it. Again, like Talisman, you have some stats that are tracked by counters. But these are both kind of like lives. Stamina and sanity. They're both things you lose. Money you can spend, obviously. These are clue tokens. They're going to be important for a number of reasons. They can help you in sealing gates and stuff like that. And you can also expend them for kind of die rolls. On the back, you have kind of a story of each of these characters. And it's not really important to play, but it can certainly add to the flavor if you want to kind of semi-role play while you're playing something like this. It certainly adds to the silliness factor in the game, which can be fun. You also have these little ring dings, which track pairs of attributes. So sneak and speed are matched. If you up your sneak, or your speed, you drop your sneak, and vice versa. And you have 3 sets of those. And they kind of make sense for the most part. Not so sure about fight and will, but okay, I'll buy it. You know, it's a mechanic that makes some sense. You also have cards. Now this guy starts out with this special card, which is just a bonus that he gets every turn of some extra money until he rolls poorly. You're going to have fistfuls of 6-sided dice. The game uses a lot of 6-sided dice to roll combat. It's a buckets of dice type system. You're rolling to get 5s and 6s, or depending on what's going on. There might be modifiers to that. Let's see if we got anything else kicking around now. Okay, we have these decks of special kind of item type things. They're not all items. These, for example, are skills. Items are sort of a specific subset of these. I don't know what they include. They include objects, spell books, unique items, and these are Pharaoh's stuff, exhibit items. These are skills, and these are allies, I believe. There's a pile of these things, which I believe come from the expansion, which can ban you from certain whole neighborhoods. If you do something wrong, you can get locked out of all the buildings in that neighborhood. You can still walk around on the street. Now, I didn't really explain the board too much. It's kind of complicated other than just the locations. But these yellow lines are connections between places. These big squares are streets. And the circles are basic locations. That's Arkham itself. These other decks here, this is a Mythos deck. It's going to basically generate your events for the turn. Whenever there's a turn, a new Mythos card comes up and some stuff happens. These are gate cards. They're events, like the events over there, that end up coming out when you're in an otherworld location. These are the gates themselves. Mostly every turn, a gate's going to pop open somewhere, and a monster is going to pop out of it. I got the monsters over here in this big bag. Takes a fairly large bag. There's a lot of monsters in it. I can explain them kind of briefly. I'll probably end up going over too much of the rules here. This is not a character. This is Azathoth. I randomly selected the characters as well as the monster. This is going to be a tough one. First of all, if the game comes to where Azathoth comes onto Earth, well, the game is over. The world's destroyed. Yeah. Now that's cool, because I've never succeeded in playing a game where I've closed all the gates. Out of our 3 games, one of them, we faced a fairly weak monster, and were able to wipe him out in combat. But every single game of the 3, it came down to fighting in combat, and we're questioning whether or not you can win a gate victory. Well, Azathoth kind of forces you into that. And now he has some special abilities which apply to monsters that are on the board. He has special abilities that apply to his combat role. Well, there really isn't much for him. He's going to destroy the world, which kind of makes the game simpler. You're going to miss one aspect, which is that final fight, because, well, I am almost guaranteed to fail with the gates, I think. I'm also probably almost guaranteed to fail fighting most of the monsters. Most of them are pretty tough, but, well, we got kind of lucky with one of them. Alright, let's see what else we got here. What about the rest of the board? Well, there's a terror track, which is an effect on the civilians of Arkham. Once it hits 10, everybody left. The town is vacant. And that means the monsters are free to roam the streets entirely. Otherwise, there's a limit on the number of monsters, and it's based on the number of players. Any additional monsters go into the outskirts. Flying monsters can soar up to the sky. That's sort of part of their movement. If they can't find somebody next to them to hit, they just go up in the air, and then they can hit people anywhere on the streets of Arkham. Lost in time and space is something that can happen to you in general when you're in the other worlds and you fall unconscious or go insane. Now, normally in Arkham, if you fall unconscious or go insane, you end up just being teleported to either the asylum or the hospital. Each of the characters has one of these little stand-up figures in addition to their information here. We get a bunch of tiles or tokens here. Most of them I've explained. I haven't explained these. Every turn that a gate opens up, a little eye goes over on your monster. And once that eye gets up to the top, well, he shows up and in Azathoth's case destroys the world. In most of their cases, you get to fight him. Great. Well, got some other little tokens here. These guys are to mark special locations in the streets that might come up from the cards. These are the mark once you've been sucked through to another world to indicate that you won't get sucked through again while you're standing there. These are little closed locations. The terror level can cause different locations to close. So like at 3, the general store closes, and 6 and 9 also have their special effects. Alright, let's look a little bit at what the rules are. I don't want to go into them in too much detail. I don't really like doing that, and I think there's other people who probably have covered the rules fairly well. I'm fairly familiar with them, so I don't really need to do it, except to prove that I don't really know them as well as I think. Okay, there's 4 basic phases in a game. Upkeep, movement, Arkham encounters, otherworld encounters, and mythos. In the upkeep phase, it's basically a bookkeeping type phase. You get to do a number of things. So, for example, the retainer pays his money to you at that point. Then you roll a die and see if you lose him. Each character is allowed to slide his little stat markers around, though. And he can do that up a number of stat markers, or a number of spaces equal to his focus. So the more focused you are, the better you are. And did I mention, they each have their own little special rules. So, for example, he gets additional cards in location encounters and gets to choose which one he wants to take. These are cool, you know, ways that you have to kind of interact. Now, this is a fully cooperative game, sort of. There's victory conditions listed in it, but nobody seems to take them too seriously in the rules. You can assess who did the best. Frankly, I'm not sure how valuable that is. I would say this game is hard enough that nobody should be trying. It's not like a Republic of Rome type game where, yeah, you're trying to save Rome, but overall you're trying to win the game. It really is more like a Pandemic or a Red November, where you really should be just focused on trying to solve this thing. Anything outside of that, you're probably just going to cause problems because it's hard enough to win. Okay, movement phase. Well, movement's based on your speed. You're allowed to move a number of spaces equal to your speed, and you just go la da 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 da. Yeah, as long as there are no monsters. If there are monsters, you have a problem. You can't move out of a space with a monster without dealing with the monster, and you have a few choices to deal with the monster. The easiest choice probably is to sneak by him. And there, you basically get, this is how all actions work. You basically get a number of dice equal to your stat. That can be modified by the monster's ratings. So, let's take a monster who's not in use. These are special monsters that won't be used in this game. Well, this guy will subtract 3 from your stealth when you try to sneak by him. That's his awareness. Okay, so that's not too good. But you might have items and other abilities that give you bonuses there. Whatever. Okay. Let us see what else we got. When you're moving in the other world, you basically just move from one from one space in the other world to the other, or from the other world space here to the appropriate gate. There might be multiple appropriate gates, and then you get to choose. But the gates are labeled on the other side with one of these locations. Alright, then you have Arkham encounters. Well, Arkham encounters happen when you're in a location, which is not a street. But there may be things you can do in the streets based on counters or cards that are in play that count during your encounter phase. You have to be out there in your encounter phase. One of the things you can do, let me think. So, if you start the encounter phase, let's think carefully here. If you end your turn with a monster, you have to deal with the monster again, which might be sneaking by it, might also be fighting it. I'll explain fighting in a little bit, because you got to go into a lot of detail with fighting, and I don't really want to do that at this point. Okay, so if you end your turn in a space with a gate, your encounter is to get sucked through the gate. You flip the sucker over, see where it applies to, and you end up dropped there. Great. Your turn's not over. There's other things that can happen to you. You'll still get an encounter out there, but you don't get one in Arkham. If you're in Arkham, you can choose to encounter one of these. By the way, at the end of your move, if you're standing on any clue tokens, you get to scoop them up. If you choose to, you can encounter the special ability on your space. And like I said, you kind of have to be aware of all of these. I'm not, so I'll do lots of stupid things. Then, if you didn't choose, and everything's done kind of in player order, the first player holds one of these, and then you go around, and in my case we'll go counterclockwise or Widdershins, but normally you'd go clockwise like in most games. I just always do it this way for whatever reason. Each player gets to take, say, their movement in turn, each player gets their encounters in turn, etc. So, if you don't have a gate there, and if you don't choose to use a special ability in the space, you shuffle a deck for that right neighborhood and draw a card and see what happens. And those cards will be sometimes specific to specific locations, sometimes more generic to locations not specified otherwise. So, you'll see how those encounters come out if you play, watch the play along. If you don't, well, maybe you can hear somebody else talk about them. But one thing I do want to point out, I really don't like this mechanic. So what happens is you shuffle this deck and draw it every time you want to find something out. Now there's a limited number of these suckers. I would rather have an event deck, an event booklet, or even these cards and some kind of randomizer to pick from them, because shuffling up cards is a tedious mechanical action and you just have to do it a lot, but it's not as bad as I first thought. It turns out, at least in the playings I had, you don't end up hitting those guys too much, so it's okay. Alright, let's see what we have next. Next we have the Otherworld encounters. So if you're sitting around on one of these other spaces outside of Earth, you draw one of these. Well, you draw some of these. You draw one and see if the colors match any of the colors in the location you're on. So this guy, only green and red cards count for you. If you don't draw a green or red card, you keep drawing until you get one. And then these two are coded by the specific location or else in general. Some of these, like the Dreamlands, can be any color. That's just because they're so inclusive. Another dimension. That could be just about anything, right? But others are kind of more specific to what those worlds were in the mythos. Alright. And there's some multicolored ones that I think came out only in the Pharaoh's deck. And those will work in either. Alright. After that, we hit the mythos phase. And the mythos phase is broken into a number of steps. And I kind of need to flip to that to understand it. So that has its own set of steps. Open gate and spawn monster, place clue token, move monsters, and activate mythos ability. Open gate and spawn monster. Well, you draw a card, and the card's going to have information on it for where the gate opens, and then you draw a monster to come out of that gate, where any clue tokens are going to show up. It's going to have information based on these little symbols at the bottom right of the monsters telling you how the monsters are going to move. Now, some of the monsters have a colored border. These guys have a black border. Some of them will have a different color, and they have a different kind of movement. Like pale blue guys are flyers, and if they can't find something next to you, and I don't think they're affected by the little symbols, if they can't find something next to them, they fly up into the sky, and then from then on, they'll swoop down into the street and attack anyone who's out on the street. Like I said, there's a limit on monsters. If you draw too many monsters for the number of players, they start piling up in the outskirts. If enough pile up in the outskirts, they get swept back into the bag, and the terror level goes up by 1. That's not too terrible a thing. Some stores will eventually close, not so bad. What is bad is once the terror level hits 10, then the monsters all come back into the city when it hits that. And from then on, there's no limit to the number of monsters that can be in the city. And then the city can get quite dangerous. Okay, and activate mythos ability. Each card has some sort of story on it, some sort of event taking place. And that just takes place when you hit this step. If the gate opens up on you, you automatically get sucked into it. What's worse is you not only get sucked into it, as you normally would on an event, not an event. Yeah, great, I can't think of the word now. Alright, well, I can't find it. An encounter, thank you. You end up lying down, which means you're going to miss your next turn. There are other things that can happen that cause you that. For example, if you go insane, you end up lying down over in the Arkham Asylum. You'll recover with 1 sanity. If you end up lost in space and time, you end up lying down. On your next turn, you stand up, and then you end up dropping somewhere in Arkham. Okay. Let's see. So when a gate opens up, some special things happen. One of which is the Doom track advances. You get an eyeball here. That's bad because if all the eyeballs are filled, you face the monster. And in this case, the game is over. There are other ways that that can happen, though. And I gotta look them up because I don't remember them. So, the game can end in a number of ways. You can win the game by closing all the gates. So if there are no open gates on the board, and there are at least as many closed gates in players' hands, so when you close a gate, you get to keep the little token here as a trophy. Well, if there are at least as many of those as there are players in the game, and there are no gates open on the board, the game ends. Now, in 2 players, that was damn hard. I'm not so sure it will be in 4, because there's still only 1 gate opening up each turn. So it seems to me that the more players, the easier it will be to win the gate victory. I'm not sure about the combat victory because there's a penalty for that. But we'll see. Sealing gates. Okay, here's another absolute value. If you can seal 6 or more gates, and when you seal a gate, that's done in a couple of ways. There are cards that say Elder Seal. They allow you to automatically seal a gate. They actually reduce the, the Doom track by 1. You take the Doom Eye and flip it over to an Elder sign, which goes in the location. Okay, great. If you can get 6 of those on the board, you win no matter how many gates there are open, as long as you haven't lost. But there's another way, a more, I think, easier way, because I haven't seen many of those Elder Sign cards out there, which is you can spend 5 clues when you close a gate. How do you close a gate, you say? Yeah. During your Arkham encounter phase, after you've already been through the gate and come back, you get one of these little markers that says, I'm not going to get sucked in again. You can then try to close the gate. And you close the gate by making a roll against either your fight ability or against your lore ability. That many dice. Some of the gates have penalties, some have bonuses to that die roll. So you get more or less dice that way. And again, you need 5s or 6s in general. There's a modifier to that 5s and 6s, which is being blessed or cursed. I've got to load this one up, take a little pause, and then come back and try to finish up these victory conditions for you, and then go back and hit combat, I hope. So my zoom got kind of stuck there, and luckily you didn't have to see that. But we're in the middle of the final, the victory conditions here. The third way to win the game is to banish the Ancient One, which comes down to a straight out battle against whatever your bad guy is. Great. That's not going to work here. So I got 2. I got either close all the gates, which I think is more possible in 4 players than it was in 2. And I think it's probably very likely in a lot of players because you can get so much coverage on the board. But in 2 players, that was really, really tough. And someone suggested you should play 2 investigators each in 2 players. And I think that's probably right because I think you lose one of the elements of a way to end the game that's reasonable as opposed to fighting Cthulhu, for example. Alright, well, gosh, I might not win. How do I not win? Well, I get defeated, okay. If the Ancient One survives, great. That doesn't really explain it all. There's a number of ways the big bad guy can show up, and that's what I was looking for. This rule book is really terrible. I can just assure you of that, and I absolutely do not want to reread it, which is one reason I'm doing the rules kind of light, but I did want to find out how the game ends. Because, you know what? Otherwise, I'm not going to know when I play. So, the game ends in 1 of 2. Great. Well, somewhere in here it exists. Yeah, we're just flipping through this wide, horrible... Okay, wait. Here we go. So, we've got the ways it can end hidden somewhere later. Alright, the Doom track fills. This is what I'm used to. This sucker gets filled up and bad guy shows up. Because, you know, to tell you the truth, it's pretty easy to keep the gates under control, I guess. Too many gates open. If you opened up too many gates at the same time, he'll show up. Now that gets bigger, or gets smaller the number of players there are. So it's really hard to end the game this way in 2 players. Again, why the track filling up is how it's going to end. But in 4 players, that's only 7, and it gets smaller and smaller the more players you have. That's going to put kind of a bit of pressure on, but I still think it's easier to close the gates that are showing up the more players you have. We'll see why, because it takes a while to close a gate. Not only do you have to walk to it, which can be difficult, but when you fall through it, it takes you a couple of turns to finish closing. You also have to be good at closing it, which is kind of a tricky part. One thing that's going to be kind of different, though, is I think sealing gates, it's going to be hard to gather all the clues in this many people to do the sealing gates victory. On the other hand, that's really hard in 2 players because it's 6 gates. In 2 players, you only have to close 2 gates. If you get really lucky early in the game, you could actually get a win off with 2 players by closing gates. But that's really lucky. The final way you can lose and cause the big baddie to show up, well, not lose, you cause him to show up and you gotta fight him, is if all these gate markers are gone and a new one's gotta show up and there isn't one to play there. Now, how could that happen? Well, I mean, wouldn't there be enough out there? No, remember players can hold those gate tokens. And this is kind of the key. Those gate tokens have some value. You can trade them in somewhere or another. So for example, here you can trade a gate trophy in for $5 or some monster trophies. When you kill monsters, you get to hold their trophies as well. Now that holds them out of the deck, which if you're killing weak monsters means well, you're not going to repick weak monsters. When you throw them in as trophies, they go back in, so you can add more to the weak monsters. Monster trophies aren't terribly valuable. Gate trophies are, however, because if you wipe all the gates out, you have to have enough gate trophies in players' hands to equal the number of players. So you got to have 4 of them in your hand. Now that's not too hard to have the number of players, in this case, at 4, and be able to keep that replenished. But maybe in 8 players that becomes kind of tricky. So there's kind of this, I think, a different flavor to the game depending on the number of players that are playing. 2 players was definitely rough because it did come down to the confrontation all the time. And I think the confrontation is tough with some monsters, like, say, Azathoth, where you cannot win. Alright, let's get into combat, and then we'll get into the big baddie, you know, the final boss scene. Even though we're not going to see that here. So normal combat works as follows. First, hey, you just saw something nasty that you couldn't sneak away from. You heard him, you tried to hide, perhaps, or you just walked up and said, yo! But once you face that thing, you gotta check your sanity. And this is very Call of Cthulhu feel here. What you do is you end up rolling, I believe it's your will number of dice, and monsters may affect that, I don't remember. Let's see. Yes. So down here, there's a number, not on this one, that might be a penalty or bonus towards your sanity check, and then there's a number of brains, which indicates how many sanity hits you take for fighting him, for losing that sanity check. Then, you have the choice to fight or flee. If you flee, you can do it just like you did before, with an evasion using sneak. You've seen the monster. You had to go look around that corner, didn't you? But now, well, you're going to try to sneak away still. And you make the same roll as before. If you fail at that, or if you fail your fight roll, which we'll get to in a moment, you take a penalty, which is listed over here. And in either of these, if there's no number of hearts or brains listed, it's a 1-point penalty, unless the special ability says otherwise. So this guy has kind of a yucky. Before making a horror check, if you fail a luck check, you're devoured by it. Luckily, these aren't in the game. They're only in with one of the monsters. Here's one with some symbols on it. It's going to be a -1 to your sanity check, and it'll take 2 of your sanity if you fail. And this is a -2 to your fight check. Your evasion check is still going to be ruled by this. A -2 to your fight check, and you'll take 2 stamina for a loss if you fail to handle him. And the stamina check, well, that's handled just, the fight check, that's handled just by taking your fight rating and subtracting or adding any bonus or malice on these cards. The opposite, actually. But, so, if you win in either of those, you've defeated the monster in some sense. If you just evade him, you're fine, but the monster's still there. If you succeed in fighting him, you probably destroy him, and you get to keep him as a trophy, which you can turn in somewhere. But, if you fail, well, you got to start all over again. Not with the horror check, but you still have to choose fight or flee and roll that again. And you keep doing that until either you get away, kill the monster, or, well, go insane or pass out. Of course, some of the monsters, like the one we noted, might devour you instead. And then you're just gone. You get a new character because this is not a game where you're knocked out permanently. But that's okay. All right. What about the boss fight? Well, so this works a little differently. This works kind of like the main game. You've got kind of this upkeep phase where you get to do changes to your stats, and you get to hand equipment off, and you get to roll dice and all kind of stuff for your special cards. You can, by the way, whenever you're in the same location with another player, you can hand equipment off to them. That's kind of cool. I think it may take a movement point, but I don't know. Because, for example, I had one character who had the Thompson submachine gun and 2 pistols as his starting stuff. It's like, well, I can't use all these weapons. You have a limit on your weapons. I didn't mention this, but some of the equipment comes with hands in it. And you're only allowed to have 2 hands unless you have more with your character for some reason. Oh no, wait, that's the bad guys. Yeah, your characters are only allowed to have 2 hands, so they can, you know, shoot 2 pistols at once because they each take a hand. Or some spells take 1, 2, no hands. The machine gun takes 2 hands. So you've got a certain number of hands you can use in combat too, which is what you have. And you get to use them every round. Anyway, I was able to hand that off to my wife so that she could fight too. Alright, let's see what we got here. So, after the investigators refresh, they get to attack. Now, here they have to fight. They don't have an option, and they have to use a combat check in general, unless they're casting a spell. Now, casting spells, the way that usually works is a roll against your lore ability, although there might be modifiers on the particular spell, and that may give you a huge bonus against a creature, including the big guy, or it may give you some other advantage. Many of the creatures are immune to physical attacks, which means you can't shoot a gun at them. There's certain weapons that are marked as physical attack. Your fight value is unaffected, but you can't get these additional... a lot of the really good weapons are physical weapons. Then again, there are good weapons that are magical. They're maybe in the unique items, or you can cast spells from the books that will give you at least a temporary magical item. Now, when you attack, you're using your fight value, possibly modified by weapons. You make a roll. The monster, well, the big guy, may have some modifier here to his attack value. It's listed up here. So, for example, with Azathoth, you subtract infinity from your attack. And then you have that amount of dice. Now, here's what's kind of cool. Not with Azathoth, but with any other monster, any other action. If you fail an action, or you don't like your result or whatever, you can spend a clue token to roll another die. And you can do this as many times as you have clue tokens. You don't have to choose to use, say, 7 clue tokens at once. You can say, well, I only need 1 success. I'll roll 1 die. Okay, I need a success, and I still didn't get it. I'll roll another die, and just spend them 1 at a time to reroll dice until you get that 5 or 6 that you need. Okay, so if the investigator fails to attack, then the Ancient One will be attacking each investigator, and he just does his result, okay? He's gonna, and not in the case of Azathoth, but each of them has sort of a combat, other than him, has a combat thingy. Take a look at one that's real. So let's take a look at this guy. So he's got a -4 to any attack die rolls against him. At the start of the game, yeah, he gets these. At the start of a battle, if you have no clue tokens. So at the start of the battle, some of these creatures will just do something to you. In this case, he wipes out anybody who doesn't have clues. So you better have a clue before you go to fight him. If you had a clue, you wouldn't be fighting him. Okay. His attack then might be like this. You have to pass a lore +1 check or lose a clue token. So he's wiping out your clues and then eventually eats you if you don't have enough. And some of them will attack, you know, just regular attacks. Now, if you succeed in hitting the monster, whether you succeed or not, he gets to attack. If you succeed in hitting him, you do damage to his eyes. And you have to wipe out all his eyes. Well, each eye doesn't just take 1 hit. Each eye takes a number of hits equal to the number of players. Luckily, unlike regular monsters, these are cumulative. So I could do 1 hit, and then you do 3, and we've got our 4, so we wipe out 1 eye. That makes the monster tougher the more players there are. But there's more people attacking him. So I think overall, that ends up fairly balanced. It's the gates that don't. The gates are going to be really twisted depending on the number of players. And in 2 players, there was a serious weakness in the gates. Off the bat, my opinion, at this point, is not terribly good of the game. I did not really enjoy it. My wife absolutely loved it. For me, it feels like a puzzle. There are a number of different options to it. One, it could feel kind of like a really hard to succeed in cooperative talisman. You know, you're walking around and encountering shit. Stuff's happening. And my wife loves walk in the woods type games where you're just kind of and something happens to you. Okay. I'm not thrilled with those. I don't mind kind of being a viewer of what's happening, but I want a lot of input into it. And you have some input here, there's no question. If you really try to win this thing, I think it becomes a puzzle game. It becomes, and I'm going to steal from Lance Meister here, in terms of, he put it out as, well, some people play it very seriously where, you know, if you place a guy, you need a guy here, and you want these characters or this kind of mix. One guy goes and does this, one guy does that. It's not apparent what someone should do or shouldn't do. It's not apparent what items you want to go grab for. Now, with all the expansions to this game, I'm not sure that there is any ultimate strategy. I'm guessing the ultimate strategy is based on the base game without any expansions whatsoever. But that's really what you're doing, is you're kind of trying to, I think if you play it very seriously, you're trying to figure out the puzzle to the changing events around you as to what to really target. That could be very interesting to some people. I don't like puzzle games. So for me, probably the best is to kind of sit around and laugh at what's happening. Well, I'm probably not going to win any games doing that. And I could see really annoying, more serious players with that. My wife doesn't mind that, but, you know, and if she tells me to do something in it, I'll probably do it unless I can think of a really great reason to argue against that. Just because if she thinks she can get that kind of puzzle atmosphere out of it, that's great. But are those the only 2 ways? I don't know. You know, as a puzzle, I'm not thrilled with it, but I could get drawn into that and enjoy playing that as long as someone else is convincing, you know, doing a lot of convincing work and everything. So I can think of an old friend of mine, we used to play Republic of Rome, 2-player, and that's a tough game like this is. And we'd be fighting so hard to make Rome survive, not really trying to win the game, but because there's all these random, not NPC buttheads running factions trying to ruin Rome, that it becomes much tougher than, say, a 3-player game would. This is kind of like that. Okay, what do I have to do? How do we make this work? Pandemic kind of felt that way. The puzzle's harder here, though. This is a harder game than Pandemic. It's definitely a much harder game than Red November. So it's very difficult to beat the game. At least for me. So then, the one other thing that supposedly this has is dripping with theme. Well, okay. But to me, it just does not compare to what I see a Call of Cthulhu role-playing game evoking in me. I can't translate a board game into that full experience. I'm not there. I'm not right there. Tell you the truth, I can do that with my battle games. I can do that with SPQR. I can step aside from that and really picture it, and picture that whole battle going on. I can picture it in a role-playing game. I've never had the joy of playing Call of Cthulhu in a situation that was right. Unfortunately, I was always the person running it, and I can't do a good job with that. That game just does not work for me. In fact, sadly, no Chaosium game does. I'm not sure why. But I've been in role-playing games, both as a player and as a GM, where it's worked right. you know, where I'm in it completely, or where my players are mostly in it completely. And oh boy, you know, that's a beautiful experience. I'm not going to get that in this game. I'm not going to get that. I'm not going to get that if I'm trying to puzzle out what place I have to go to get points, and I'm not going to get that if I feel like I'm in a walk in the woods. Neither way. It's just not going to evoke that experience in me. Same game, if it was kind of a first-person shooter type game on the computer, yeah, it would trap me, just like a role-playing game would. It wouldn't have to be a good game. It wouldn't have to have lots and lots of decisions or anything. It could just catch me with that visual. And that's how a role-playing game can do it as well. Anyway, I'll try to assess it outside of that thematic aspect because it will not catch me that way. Somehow or another it does catch my wife that way. But here's the problem. Outside of that, I don't see much. I see a puzzle game that's hard, and I don't like those. And I see this kind of random walk game that's not as pleasant to me as some others, like Tales of the Arabian Nights, or I don't know, there's others. Anyway, let's send this up.